Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin. There will be time for questions at the end. We have a young gentleman who's going to teed up to ask the first one, but we will be saving time at the end for that. It's my great joy to welcome back to Keble Rufus, 10 years on. Great to see you again. Maybe we won't leave us along next time, maybe 3 or 4 years. Yep. Rufus has just finished the second of 2 5-year stints as Artistic Director and Chief Executive of the National Theatre. Before we move on to the world of theatre, Rufus, I believe you have a personal connection to Keble.
I do. In fact, it's sort of become a quadruple connection. I come from quite a large family. I have many siblings, one of which was the organ scholar here. And she, while she was here, she met another Keble student, and they had 2 children, one of whom I think graduated from Keble last year. So there's actually a whole Keble line. I have to say, and this will come up, I'm sure, because I've got a sense of the sort of questions that Robin might ask me. I have to say I'm entirely uneducated, and the only times I've been to university have been to visit my siblings or to events like this. But yes, I do have that connection, but also in the last 2 to 3 years of my tenure at the National Theatre, my executive director and finally co-chief executive was a woman called Kate Varra, who also is a Keble graduate.
Keble person, absolutely. Now, Rufus, going to take you back in time. What are your earliest memories of the theatre? Say something like a pantomime. What was your first encounter with the theatre?
Well, actually, my mum was amongst other things, she played the flute, and she used to play in the pit orchestras. I grew up in Nigeria and Ethiopia and Malaysia, and there were various, little organisations that put on shows, and she would sometimes play in the pit for those. But I think possibly before that, I played a chicken in a production of Noah's Flood when I was 3, I think. That was my first memory, and I made a wrong entrance. I remember I walked on too early and was struck with shame, but also realised that it would be better to keep going than to turn back. As if to say, I am the most important animal on the ark. I think that's probably it. Noah's Flood in a chicken costume.
That's fair enough. When you were at school, sort of doing O-levels and A-levels, what were the first plays you went to see in theatres? Anything particularly make an impression on you then? When we came back to the UK when I was 12, we lived in the Midlands, and so the high school that I was at would just very occasionally would do trips to Stratford. So I saw a couple of shows there. But when I was 16, I left school and went to a further education college, which had a tiny theatre, not much bigger than this room. And we'd have touring productions come in, and a young company then called Cheek by Jowl, who then went on, Declan Donnellan, when he was a very young director, would do these productions which would literally be on a mat, I remember seeing The Country Wife and Macbeth and various other shows done in the most simple way, and I found that very enlivening, sort of total theatre in the simplest way, almost no lights, no sound, 4 or 5 actors, and these incredible stories coming out. Because I was the victim, not the victim, I participated in school trips to Stratford. And I always felt slightly sorry for the actors, and because people would be busy sort of eating sweets and so forth. And
one particular gentleman, sadly no longer with us, Oxford English fellow, he hushed everybody by taking the programme round on the bus and showing everybody a picture of Helen Mirren and saying, you know, if you must concentrate because she runs across the back of the stage in a state of undress. And there was total silence from the contingent on that one occasion, but it didn't happen, and so he didn't get away with it twice. Plays that you read that when you were at school impressed you? Was there anything that sort of sticks in the memory now? Have you got a few lines of something? Is there any particular plays that you read as opposed to watched?
I think it's more about the plays that you're in as
Right.
opposed to the ones that you read, from my point of view. I mean, I hope that experiencing theatre can be a life-changing thing. Being in it certainly can, without a shadow of a doubt, once you start understanding what, you know, that mutual dependency and the kind of creative self-expression that it fosters. Yes, there are Ernie's incredible hallucinations. I have no idea if it's any good, but I loved being in it when I was 10, and then, you know, various other. I was in a production of Murder in the Cathedral, which is a poem, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But it was really more. I mean, to be honest, it was more about whatever I was doing with. You know, with my mates, and the play was just a sort of crucible for that.
And when it came to the sort of university versus RADA, did you have any sort of difficulty choosing your predecessor at the National Theatre? Went the sort of Cambridge reading English, footlights, etc. But you went the RADA route.
I did. As I said, I left school at 16. I went and did a foundation course in theatre, so I didn't ever have the academic means to get to Oxford or Cambridge, but it was a decision really that I made earlier than that at 16, and then it took me 4 years to get into drama school. I didn't go straight from school. I did an apprenticeship as a painter and decorator, and I travelled and played in bands and misbehaved generally. I think I knew quite young that and maybe this was totally misplaced, that I would only thrive in a higher education system where there was quite a lot of stick and not so much carrot. That I thought if I went to university, I would be one of those who would just about get through the first year and possibly the second year, do lots of shows and revise too late, not do the necessary reading.
Sure.
So having the and at drama school, the drama school that I think I simply didn't have the self-discipline to apply myself at university. So
No, that's very fair. And acting versus directing, was it at RADA or afterwards that you chose to go the directing role, and why was that?
I think I knew that was the education that I wanted to have. So I did try for several years until they got bored of me and let me in. But I didn't ever really think I would have a career as an actor. And yes, I didn't really think beyond that. By then I'd formed a little theatre company, or I'd played in bands and written a load of music, and had generated quite a lot of stuff. Acting is quite a difficult job in many ways, but the powerlessness of it was never going to suit me. Where you're sort of at the whim of so many kind of competing whims, opportunities, lack of opportunities, rejection, all of those things. And so the turning point for me came, I'd been acting for 3 or 4 years and, had done a few jobs and again was writing music at the same time.
And then I got involved with a sort of sort of more communist setup, really, of a fringe theatre where they actually needed somebody to help them build a theatre. So they asked me to get involved for my building skills. But I've sort of found a home there, and the director of the place directed me, realised that I wasn't going to be any great cop as an actor because I was far too interested in the bigger picture, and he suggested that I directed, and it was sort of like a light going on, really. And from the first day of rehearsal of the first show that I directed, I thought, that's it, I'm much happier now.
That's the moment. Would you say that your production of Feston in 2004, a play by David Eldridge, would you say that was a big breakthrough moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most artistic careers you can sort of chart. They don't tell the whole story at all, but you need to be lucky at certain moments, or the right thing needs to happen at the right time. And there's a little story, actually. It took me, for years and years, I tried to get into the National Theatre when I was a fringe director and working my way up. And the way into the National Theatre back then was to get into the National Theatre Studio, which is a building next to the Old Vic, which is sort of the research and development place where things get cooked up. And as a young director, that's where you really wanted to be, because you could test your arm on stuff, and you might do some readings of plays that were coming through, and it was seen as the sort of this is the sort of fulcrum, or the way in. And eventually, after years of trying, I was finally allowed in to do 2 weeks on an adaptation that I wanted to do of L'Étranger by Albert Camus. And this is great. I'm going to work up the adaptation. I'm going to get a load of actors from the company, and then we'll do something. And I worked on the adaptation, and I asked all the actors from the company that I wanted, and none of them said yes. So I had to go to the person who's running the studio and say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to fire me because none of the actors want to work with me. And she said, oh, don't be stupid. You look absolutely exhausted. Why don't you just go into a room upstairs and sleep for the second week, or you can read a play or do whatever you want, and you can just, and I thought that was amazing, so I went up and had a kip. And then my partner phoned me up and said, I've just seen this film, and you've got to see it. It's fantastic. So the second day, instead of having a kip, I went to see the film of Feston. If any of you haven't seen that film, go and see it. It's absolutely fantastic. And it also is sort of tailor-made for theatre in lots of ways. So when the possibility of that adaptation that David did came up, I fought very hard to direct it because I already had a deep connection with it. And it's about siblings, really, and that's something that I knew a great deal about. So it was a breakthrough. The show went very well. It was my first sort of, was it my first West End show? But it was, the awards and all that kind of stuff. but it was the culmination of lots of other, all these things don't come by accident. Everything. I've been lucky in that by the time I worked on, I would feel confident working on any stage in the world now of any scale, and I've worked on some of the biggest ones. But my career, I've been very lucky. It's just been step by step by step. There were no huge breaks that put me into a situation where I was overexposed, if that makes sense. And conversely, when things go wrong in that situation, you go, okay, well, that didn't work, but the other 35 things that I've done up until this point have been all right, so maybe I'm not quite the loser that in this moment I think I am. I think it's very difficult when people get thrust. When people find success or stardom or whatever very early in their careers, I think that can be really problematic for them. And I've been lucky that it's all been very steady.
What attracted you to the splendid London Road as a play?
So London Road, for those of you that don't know, is a verbatim musical, which is sounds odd. A woman went, Alecky Blythe went around Ipswich in the wake of the murders of the sex workers there a few years ago, and interviewed everybody, and those interviews were set to music. And it's completely extraordinary, a total one-off.
And I suppose the main thing that attracted me to it was that I had no idea at all how to do it. And in a way, if I've been fortunate enough and also canny enough to be guided by one principle, it's that: don't repeat yourself. If you don't know how to do something, then it means you're going to be the best version of yourself, because you're going to be open when you're going into the process. If you don't know, when you're working with somebody who's done what you're doing 20 or 30 times before, you can sit and listen to the anecdotes and whatever and do what you're told, and it'll probably be quite good because they know what they're doing, but there isn't really that shared collaborative exploration. So for me, it was the fact that I just thought I didn't know what the hell it was, and because I'd taken so many risks before in my career, that's why they chose me, because the producers at the time didn't know how to do it either, and they thought, well, who does weird shit?
I said, what persuaded you then to go on and actually make a film of London Road? Because that's a slightly different milieu.
Yeah, it is, and it's a strange one. So when I took over the National, I suppose there were two principal doors that I closed. I didn't close. I had to sort of slightly. One of them was being a dedicated father, because it's all-consuming, and it had I hope not permanent, but it did have quite an impact on the amount of time I could spend at home. But in terms of career, the difficult one was closing the door on my film career, which had just got going. I'd made a film which had done quite well independently, and you have that moment where the producers go, what do you want to do next? And because London Road had been such an extraordinary experience, and I could imagine it as a film, I pushed for that. It's totally different film from the stage show, but and it was always going to be an art house piece. It's such a weird thing, but it was it was great. It was lovely to find a new life for it.
We first met when you directed, and your wife Tanya wrote a play called Table, the first play put on in the Shed, a temporary structure which I sponsored and was very sad didn't carry on. What are your memories of Table as a play and putting it on in the Shed?
Well, it's interesting because I've now got back to a place where I have a degree of choice about what I do next. I no longer have meetings in the diary, the PA, the 1,200 staff, and all the rest of it. And the thing that I'm drawn back to most of all is the process that brought about that play. It was absolutely written by Tanya, who's sat over there, but we created it very much in a spirit of exploration and improvisation. We knew what the subject was. We worked with a string of very brilliant actors where we just fed them and improvised with them, and from that Tanya constructed what became this 4 or 5 generation family drama around a table. The origin of it actually was I was having a meeting with a younger director who I was sort of partly mentoring, and I remember we were in a cafe in North London, and she was very promising, but she was doing that kind of the thing of when somebody looks at you and basically what they're saying is, I want your career. And you go, no, it's not that. Well, that ain't going to happen. You've got to, and actually there's lots of things about my career that you wouldn't want. What you want is your career, and the thing to take from mine is get off your ass and just make stuff happen. Something I always said to younger directors whenever and I say it still, is I didn't earn £10,000 in a year until I was 36.
you sort of have to say it 3 times. You go, until I was 36, by which time I had a child. It's not, you know, it's not...
Hollywood.
It's not Hollywood. It's not what you think it's going to be, and it's going to be tough. And of course, I'm lucky it worked out. I have a house now, or a flat, and in a way that's the point. I have a flat, don't have a house, because you can't do that amount of time and not earn any money and have the sort of life that that other career choices and compromises or whatever can give you. Anyway, she was busy going, I want your career. And I got frustrated with her and said, look, you can just make opportunities from wherever you are if you choose to. And she said, like what? And I said, like this table. You know, if you look at this table, here we are on a Gigi cafe in, you know, Islington. But if you look at it, it's covered in marks. It's got the history of this table. Make a piece about, you know, just make a piece about the history of this table. Except you can't do that, because that's my idea. Because I realised, even as I was saying it, that's... and as it happened, Tanya and I have a fantastic table, which has in it the marks of our relationship. We bought it very early in our relationship, and it's inscribed by the cats, the scratches on the legs, and the midwife who is delivering our first child, and the other midwife who is delivering our second child, both of whom were born at home, and everybody else, and my dad, who died a long time ago, and you know, all the rest of it. And I mentioned this to Tanya, and she absolutely ran with it. So I think there's something about the. It was a huge process of collaboration, where you're really pooling the collective intelligence and creativity of the people that you're working with, and that's for me what theatre is. At its heart.
What changes did you deliberately bring to the National Theatre from 2015 to 2025 as artistic director and chief executive? Don't need to answer that.
Well, how long have you got? So I'm going to take the model of a guy who you may all have heard of, called John Keble. I'm going to get some of this wrong, and all of you will know more about it than I do. But as I understand it, this place was not built through one wealthy benefactor saying, let's give you the money to build this thing. But rather it was fundraised for collectively in the memory of somebody because of the sort of person he was and because of the sort of things he believed in. And consequently, those principles were adhered to in the principles of Keble and what it was about. Everybody will eat collectively. You don't have private dining rooms. You don't have staff who come in and cook for you just because your father happens to be Lord whatever. The rooms are smaller. They're not, you know. And the idea, as I understand it, was that the college that was built in his memory would be a place that was open for everybody, and in a way. To do with the times and everything else, that was not the theatre that I inherited. And so representation became a really key part of it. Access, the reach of it, bringing the education department into the centre of our thinking so that we could really hugely expand that, particularly in the wake of COVID, the reach, the global reach, and you know, inevitably that became about really and using the opportunity of the sort of digital expansion, environmental practice was also, it became an increasingly primary underpinning. But the most important thing was that question of what is our nation and how do we make sure that they are represented on our stages and in our staff. That is quite a complicated thing to try and achieve. I do think in the decade that I was there, we made a lot of mistakes. I certainly learnt a lot of an awful lot of things, but it's a very, very different place now in the look of it
Completely.
than it was.
I completely go with that. Slightly extended next sort of question ramble. In 2018, you directed your first Shakespeare play for 25 years, Macbeth. Why the delay? Might you do more Shakespeare? Or are you like me and a huge fan of Christopher Marlowe? Actually prefer him to the Bard, a bit controversial. Nobody much liked me saying that when I read English at Oxford. I kindly commend to you and the audience, and I'll get you a copy of this, Rufus, this wonderful book by Stephen Greenblatt called Dark Renaissance, which is an incredible book about the extraordinary life and genius of Christopher Marlowe. Just extraordinary. Have you directed any Marlowe plays with his brilliant portrayal of complex characters? I remember an epic Tamburlaine at the RSC with Anthony Shear, an equally epic RSC production of The Jew of Malta, and they really sort of stick in the mind as just extraordinary sort of theatrical experiences where the words echo and echo and echo.
Well, the simple answer is no. I have never directed anything by Marlowe. I suppose I have always been interested in that period. Historically, what was going on? I ended up doing a big contemporary opera about Dr. John Dee, who was
The Conjurer.
yes, sort of Faustus and Prospero and all these other characters, fictional characters at the time were based on Dr. Dee. And so it's an area of history that I'm interested in. But what I was saying at the beginning when I was dissing myself for having no education, there are lots of people who know an awful lot more about the period than I do and feel much more comfortable with that area of drama, coupled with the fact that I've always been interested as a director, as a practitioner in new writing more. I'm an interventionist director. I love being involved dramaturgically, and so all the work that I did before I got that job was in that arena of devising or new plays, adaptation. And by the time I got to that stage, there simply were a lot of people around me who knew much more about that and consequently did it better. I did direct Macbeth. It played in the Olivier Theatre before going on a big nationwide tour. And I remember talking to an actor that you may have heard of called Ian McKellen shortly before going into rehearsals, and we were having a chat. And I said, "Oh, Ian, I'm going to do the Scottish play because his performance in a very iconic production early in his career was something that I'd seen and was very taken with." And he said, "Oh, good. Where are you going to do that?" And I said, "I don't know if this is being recorded, so I'm quoting him, so it's not really swearing." I said, "I'm going to do it in the Olivier." And he, "What the fuck are you doing that for?" And he basically said, you cannot do that play in a big theatre. It can't work. It's an internal play, and it won't work. But I'd already started selling tickets, and I didn't entirely agree with him, but certainly we got hammered by the press. We sold all the tickets because it was Macbeth. 200-seater, like the production that he'd done. Funnily enough, they've just done a production at the RSC, which I haven't seen, but I've read about, and apparently it's incredible, and it's in the other place, which is totally tiny. So there's that's canny. That can now, of course, move to a bigger theatre, and it will do well on its reputation. But no, I look forward to reading that book. Marlowe's a fascinating character, but I've never.
There's a play to be written about Marlowe himself, but interesting because I saw both Tamburlaine with Anthony Shear and the Jew of Malta both at the other place. And I think, you know, that sort of experimental flavour carried on. What is your take on the RSC? I can't find any record of you directing there. Is it a forbidden city, or do you go and watch productions there sometimes?
I do sometimes. Obviously, I've been in the other camp I was an associate at the National for a few years before I took over. So for the last 15 years, I've been very much tied with one organisation. And it's sort of a personal thing. Before I did that, the RSC, I'm not boasting, I was offered various opportunities to go there, but the way it worked was they had an ensemble, so you would be sharing a cast with another director. And we couldn't get on with that. That isn't it. Inevitably is not. I found that difficult because the actors will, you know, there's going to be one process that they're enjoying more than another, and the other director is doubtless going to be a friend of mine, and I just didn't fancy it. I think I'm going to lose my RSC cherry in the next couple of years. That's a secret, but I'm in the process of talking with them. I have to say that the folk that are running it now, Dan and Tamara, are both terrific, and they do seem to be on a good roll there, which is great.
No, it definitely is. I shall keep renewing my membership there and hope to see you. And I might have to drag you and Tanya there to a couple just to make sure you stay on the road.
It won't be a Shakespeare though, and I'm sorry to say it won't be a Marlowe either.
No Marlowe. Well, I think Tanya may think differently. Hex at the National Theatre is a play you co-wrote with your wife Tanya and Jim Fortune. How did you find directing plays you co-wrote?
Well, that's not a first, because...
No, it was a good example, I thought.
Yeah, I'd done an adaptation of Tintin with the writer David Gregg before. There were various other times where I'd been involved in the writing. Did a Brexit piece with Caroline Duffy. You know, there were and on Hex, I didn't write the book. I wrote the lyrics, which is different. I mean, it's a very particular piece that from your telling of it, it sounds like I only worked with the writer Tanya Rondo when I was at the National Theatre.
Oh no! I've got some more.
We had a long, I think 8-year time away from each other because that felt inappropriate. But with Hex, it was an adaptation that Tanya did of an adaptation that I had done, of an adaptation that I'd worked with another writer of a version of Sleeping Beauty. So it had been through, and this process had gone, even in my career, had gone on since 1993. So it was material that both Tanya and I had very, very deep in our sort of dramaturgical bones. And I think, you know, lyric writing is, I was a musician for a long time, and something that I'd done a lot of in the past, and it felt, I don't know, it just felt, also a lot of it was written over the written work, creative relief from firing hundreds of people and dealing with all of that.
Might we see you writing entire plays yourself going forward, and how would you feel about becoming more of a writer and seeing other directors direct plays that you've written?
Well, it's funny when having been an actor and then becoming a director, you think, oh, I wish I'd known that when I was acting. I wish I'd known how inhibited I was, or how obstructive. And I'm sure if I saw other directors, I have seen other directors direct work that I've written in the past. But I think in the future I'm sure I'd probably learn how thoughtless I was in the way that I treated writers in the past. No, I think it would be great. And look, I'd love to write more. I am writing a bit more at the moment. It's a craft. It's a really developed craft, and I haven't done my 10,000 hours, so I've got to put them in. There's no shortcuts.
No.
But also I've changed my life really radically, in that I now live in a small village in Fife in Scotland, and if I want to earn a living while I'm there, I can't be directing in cities the whole time. So
Yeah, so the writing might fit in. Do you think you might return to Broadway after the National Theatre, or would you preferring to work over here in British theatre, say West End, National, Bridge, whatever?
Broadway doesn't happen on its own. It's such a to put a musical on Broadway now costs about $22 million to put it on. To do a play even off Broadway at a place like the Public Theatre or St Anne's Warehouse or the Armory, one of those, is that you're talking about $1.5 million, $2 million. So it's commercial to a level which just makes the West End look like nothing. So the only way that would happen, and the only way I'd want it to happen, is if you're going there on the back of something which had already proved itself in other arenas. I certainly wouldn't consider going. And if somebody said, let's do this show on Broadway and open on Broadway, I can't think of anything worse. Just because that's a horrific commercial market, and I'm not skilled enough to know what those, or interested enough in what those the bells and whistles that you have to blow on and hit the other way around. So I would never say never. There's a show at the moment that we've been offered a New York home for, and that I've done in the past, and we'll try and make that happen. But it would have to be that way around. I think at this age, I'm only interested in making work that I care about, and usually that means you've got to start small and let it grow. And if it doesn't grow, then it shouldn't.
No, that's very.
And that's a very fortunate place to be in. I mean, I don't need to be. My kids are grown up now.
No, you've been up in Scotland post the National Theatre, reviving up there. When you look back at the period 2015 to 2025, what are your personal high points and low points? I guess COVID's part of that as well.
If I had, in the bigger picture, if I had, the high point, I think, is that if you're trying to change the course of an institution. And I suppose what I was saying earlier about representation was probably the most obvious. Or if you're trying to change the way that an institution is run, then the measure of that is whether you get fired because you've screwed it up financially. In the end, the thing that would have got me fired, apart from obvious terrible misdemeanors, would be if I drove the place into a financial place where it wasn't sustainable. The National Theatre depends on, 14% of our income is subsidy. And beyond that, 30% is box office on the South Bank, but a further now 25% is fundraising, but that really is attached to box office, because those fundraisers won't get involved if they don't like the quality of what you're doing. And then beyond that, the NT Live or the commercial work, all the rest of it is, the bars, cafes, restaurants, they're all related to people coming through the door. There's an interesting thing and a healthy thing in British theatre, which is the interdependence between subsidy and commercial theatre, which means that we
as practitioners, can never lose sight of what our job is, and that is to entertain or inspire or stimulate our audience. You don't sit apart from the audience. There isn't a donor that's paying for you to do it regardless what the audience think, and there isn't state subsidy to the level where you don't need to worry about that. And I think that's healthy. So I'm getting back to your question. I'm proud that we managed to change the face of the National Theatre, the artists who are making work there, and still keep the box office tills ringing. It was those 10 years, with the exception of COVID, were the most successful financially and in terms of box office in the theatre's history, and it's also where we most radically changed the work. So that's the thing, that's the high point, it's the thing I'm most proud of. All kinds of problems on the way, and a huge steep learning curve for me and my own sort of assumptions and over-optimism, arrogance, all the rest of it within that. The low point, without a doubt, was COVID. That was really, really tough in all sorts of ways. Colleagues died. I had to lay off, or we, the management, had to lay off 600 people, and theatre around the country has not recovered fully. It's changed many things which we had to see happen, and even at the time, the way the freelancers were treated and our collective institutional lack of awareness of what was happening at the time, and my personal lack of awareness, I could have done more in that moment to shout louder about that, or to make sure that the National Theatre was doing what it could, even for the freelancers that had worked with us. We did more than most. But there's a lot of pain and regret and difficulty around that period. Those are big things. There are tons of little things, little moments of triumph and disasters and shame happen every week there. It was very exciting.
A wild ride.
Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, COVID, it struck me, in COVID, because I was cancer and I had as a shield for a very long time. One of the things that struck me, sort of looking at historical parallels, other than the Spanish flu, but was Cromwell shutting the playhouses because they were potentially dissident. And it must have been extraordinary, and parallels there with writers during COVID, where the theatres were shut. And you had basically the best part of 2 years of theatres being shut. But it had happened before, and it must have been bloody awful for those guys, because there was no nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like a cliched sort of cartoon of over-optimism, but yes, there are sort of three notable periods of theatres being shut in British history. One is around 1600, when the plague came through and the theatres were shut down then, and Shakespeare didn't have a theatre to write in, so he sat on his own and thought, what am I going to do? I better write the sonnets, and then King Lear. And when the theatres reopened again, they covered them up to keep the bad air out, and thus the craft of theatre lighting was invented. And the theatres were made a lot more safer. Like you say, in the Cromwellian period before Charles II came on, I think it was 18 years of the theatres being shut. Actors were, and theatre makers were deemed to be criminals, and people were charged. It was a criminal act to even go and see a piece of theatre. When Charles II came back and theatre was restored, women went on stage for the first time. So that changed things again. There was a brief period, not that long, but there was a brief period when the theatres were shut during the Second World War. And when that conflict was finally resolved, the Arts Council was formed. So if you look at those three periods, you can go out of those crises in very different ways. There was opportunity, and the medium did move forward in different ways. So even during, immediately actually, it didn't. I actually was struck down with COVID on the day that we closed the theatre. But even through that, a couple of days later, we were just going, right, what is going to be the option? And then we thought it would be 6 weeks or 12 weeks. none of us had any idea what was going to happen. But because there are a lot of energized people there, I won't bore you with all the details. There are a whole load of strategies that came out of it that have changed the face of the National Theatre and our reach in the educational sense and in the international sense particularly, and obviously digital being key in that, which wouldn't have happened without that crisis. So I do think there is, obviously you've got a battle to look after the people that you're working with and everything else whenever you're really under pressure, but you've also got to have an eye to go, it's going to be way too early to judge for a long time, but there will be stuff that can come out of this, and we were on that pretty quickly.
And there was the opportunity to sort of put productions onto television or broadcast, even though the playhouses had no people in them.
Yeah, and we converted one of the theatres to turn it into a film studio. There was lots of things that went on. Yeah, digital expansion being the foremost.
Yeah, no, then I've got happily a large collection of the of old CDs, which I was able to watch from both the RSC and the National Theatre at that time. What are you currently working on? Writing, directing, reading, or a mix?
A mix, actually. I'm going to write and direct a part of a film next year. It's a film that is made up from of lots of sections directed by different people, so it's a lovely way for me to get behind the camera. I'm developing a one-man show, which I'm writing, which is a way of kind of creeping back in. And I'm also going to direct a piece of Beckett, which I've never done before. I've always been terrified of Samuel Beckett. Somebody asked me, and I thought, to go back to what I was saying earlier, I'm terrified of that, therefore I really should
do
have a go. It's terrifying.
All right, see, it's
really hard.
It's very difficult to get a foot in through the door, really.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a very strange
But unfortunately, he's really good. So you can't, you can't ever go, oh, it isn't. It just means you haven't worked hard enough. If you can't understand it, you've just got to work harder. So I'm grappling with all of those. But I'm also doing a lot of DIY. Just built a really good kayak shed, spending a lot of time outside, which is lovely.
Yeah, that's great. Stand-up show. That's a one-man show. Interesting. It won't have you front of stage and back.
No, that's not part of the plan. No, and somebody else is going to be doing the standing up. Yeah.
You'll be at the back with the stick. Where do you think we will see you next? By the sound of it, it'll be in the UK. But do you think is the closest thing sort of going on the road with something, or?
I don't know. Nothing's confirmed about it, Robin. I can't really say.
Sorry about that.
I might be doing something at a theatre somewhere near Stratford. Time the one-man show probably is going to kick off in Spain, not Edinburgh.
No. Ever done Edinburgh?
I have, yeah, a very long time ago.
With a guitar, or?
No. I did. No, that's not true. Actually, I was in a show in Edinburgh a year and a half ago. I joined in An Oak Tree. There's a show called An Oak Tree by Tim Crouch, where it's a two-hander, but the other person can have no preparation, can never have seen the show or heard anything about the show, and needs to come in completely blind, and that was me. So I performed last year at the Edinburgh Fringe for the first time in a long time.
How did it go?
It was great, yeah. Well, I enjoyed it. As I said, theatre making is sometimes more enjoyable for the people doing it than people watching it. As we all know.
But you had audiences.
We did, yeah. But they didn't know until I was until the
Pushed
show
on.
started, who was going.
Yeah.
He has a different person every night.
Crikey. Yeah, that is definitely scary.
And the Beckett, I don't know. They haven't decided yet. It's part of the Beckett Biennale, so it could be in Dublin, could be in any place that Beckett had a connection.
What of other more contemporary writers would you be tempted by? Sort of Stoppard, Beckett, Stoppard. Who else? Mildly tempted by.
I am more.
Up to date.
Yeah. Well, it would be the ones who are still writing now: Lucy
Okay.
Kirkwood, Lucy Preble, Annie Baker.
Tanya Ronda.
She's moved on. She's evolved beyond me. Yeah. We'll get the train together tomorrow.
Excellent. Is there anything, before I open out the floor, is there anything you'd like to have spoken about that I didn't touch on?
I don't know. I'm really interested to know, as always,
what's going
what
on the
people
floor.
want to know about. If there's
Perfect.
any, and all I would say is that the one thing that going through that job for the last 10 years as I've done it means is that you have very thick skin. I'm quite robust, and if any of you have anything that you're thinking, oh, that would be a bit provocative, don't worry. It's all fine. It's
Unrestricted.
good. Yeah, unrestricted, and it's great if the conversations help you think afresh about stuff or into things that you haven't considered enough.
Good. Right. Well, can I ask William Ferguson to offer some thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's been a pleasure having you. Maybe edging towards the controversial, I did a bit of reading for my degree on modern Russian theory, which inevitably includes literary theory, aesthetic theory, criticism. And even among thinkers who have nothing in common politically, all of them will agree, the ones I have known, that art without a moral or an ethical message isn't really art. This seems to be a fact of the Russian aesthetic and literary consciousness very clearly. You spoke interestingly at the beginning about conceiving of the National Theatre obviously as a public space, as a civic institution. Do you feel that you have an artistic or kind of ethical imperative to not just please your public, but actually impress upon the audience some moral or spiritual message?
Wow, a big question. And what I'm trying to do, one of the problems with being thick,
No, come on.
one of the problems with not learning, with not being trained to read and trained to take on information, it's why this place is so amazing. My son went to a place like this in the East, not here, but it's just been, it was wonderful just to see him being equipped with the ability to a long-winded way of saying, I read a fantastic essay about this question of morality in storytelling not very long ago, and I'm trying to grasp the things that I went, yes, that's exactly right, and I can't, because I can't remember it, because somehow I haven't been trained to hang on to these things. I don't have the... Look, I think there's an obligation for work to be deep. And my frustration about a lot of stories that I see is that they don't go deep enough. They ask questions. They often do have a moral. And usually, of course, in theatre, we lean to the left. The moral is usually the same thing. Be nice to people, particularly people who don't look like you. If you're horrible, things won't work out for you. Having taken the religious out of it a few hundred years ago, and of course it's controversial to sway away from that, but that in itself is simplistic. What's much more interesting for me is the deep complexity of human behaviour. We demonize this. TikTok, Twitter. If you look at the way that the international leaders behave now, you're either with us or against us, and everything since George Bush said those words now. It drives me absolutely crazy because it is simplifying something which is not simple. You know, when in all of the conversations that have been going on and the debates, you know, no grey area, that you know, the distillation of things down to being black and white is just bullshit. It's just not how people are. It's not how situations are. Everybody, you know, if you look at simple story structure, somebody wants something, they take action to achieve it. That action leads to a series of consequences which culminate in a crisis. That's a story. Somebody wants something. The reason they want something is because of what's happened to them, or and we might judge them as being this way or that way. The purpose of drama and the purpose of storytelling is to really reveal, for me, the complexity, the moral complexity. So do I think there should be a moral? No, but I think there should be moral complexity, because that is what we all experience. And a culture of blame or a culture of judgment that we seem to be in a golden age of at the moment is the opposite of what we as a species need to do if we have any hope of surviving what's coming. That's what I think. It is a great question.
Dostoevsky would probably be very happy with your view of the human personality. So, perfect answer. Thank you.
Splendid, at the front.
I guess, like, staying on complexity, I want to ask you about Stephen Sondheim and the experience of kind of working with him and doing something like Follies or Here We Are recently, and how that's kind of affected how you approach, I guess, theatre and your own writing as a lyricist.
Well, he's, you know, as a lyricist, he's, you know, that's on a different planet. He's, you know, he's amazing, and I'm, you know, one of the great. Being director of the National Theatre is the best tourist visa on the planet. It's just amazing. The places you go, the people that you meet, the opportunities you get to hang out with, you know, you can name drop for the rest of your life. And I'm really happy to drop is that I did manage to spend, you know, a bit of time with Sondheim while he was still around, and he was grumpy and scary and made me nervous. But he was also, yeah, and he was sort of intolerant in a way of keep doing this and then realising that it's not what my friend over there wants to do. I'll leave my mic alone. He was intolerant of laziness and kind of light thinking, you know, in a way that only somebody who is that age and has done so much and has been, you know, every show he ever wrote got slammed when it first opened, without exception, and yet he's revered. You think about what that does to an artist, time and time and time again. Even, you know, even when we did Here We Are. Some of the critics just couldn't help going, oh yeah, but it's da-da-da. You think, well, have you not read criticism of Stephen Sondheim throughout his entire career? You always get it wrong. Why don't you just just think about it for a minute? Think about what he's trying to do. I'm not sure I'm quite. Yes, as a lyricist, I mean, certain, you know, one thing he said in a workshop that I encouraged him to take with our musical theatre writers at the National will always stay with me. And he said, a rhyme is a rhyme. It either rhymes or you're lazy. You know, no such thing as a half rhyme. That's just lazy. And I know that often great songs don't use half rhymes and all the rest of it. But I think his point was, if you're, you know, just be really deliberate in what you're doing. I mean, he's very didactic about stuff. Not sure if I'm quite asking. Yes, people like that. It's great. It's great to have these people who are superb at what they do. But it's also great to get to know them a bit, because you realise that they're flawed and they made loads of mistakes on the way. And actually, there's a lot of trial and error. and a lot of humanity and a lot of complexity. Nobody is a genius. Evil and genius, the two words that should be banned from our language, I think.
Right, well, to produce some, there's a question there.
People like Daniel Evans and Patrick have spoken a lot recently about young people losing the art of being able to speak properly on the stage. Do you agree with that? And have you noticed it in your rehearsal room?
If I can just deal with the first part of it. Great question. I was part of something called the Oracy Commission in my last year at the National, which was a commission that was put together in order to advise the government on the importance of oracy, numeracy and literacy being the things which have obviously led the STEM thinking of Michael Gove and Nick Gibb and all the education ministers that have come since. You know, we're in an educational establishment. You'll know as well as I will the degree to which arts and education has been eroded through a focus on numeracy and literacy, and through in my view, utterly misguided view that creativity can be thought through the study of literature. Creativity is taught through being creative, doing things, and doing things involves standing up and talking about it, and the need for oracy, the need for people to be able to express themselves is something that has been screamed for by leading educationalists in every subject. English and drama, obviously, to an extent, inevitably have that as part of what they're doing. But in geography and history and maths and all the rest of it, more and more, particularly in the age of AI and the changing market, for people to think for themselves, be able to express themselves and have the self-confidence and the self-knowledge to be able to do so is profoundly important. And as that has eroded out of our education system, with the massive problem of COVID, which we're still feeling now, and what that did for young people, of any age that was impacted by that has had an impact on how people express themselves, their ability to express themselves, and of course that feeds into the performing arts. So the second part of the question is, yes, there's a problem due to the same thing of people not getting that grounding and that foundation, and that's been compounded by the fact that it's harder and harder to make a living. There's a terrible adage which I sometimes trot out, and it's very insulting, but I'm going to do it anyway. Film makes you famous, television makes you rich, theatre makes you good, and for actors. And of course it's not true. There's great skill in all of those things, but you can't get away with it in theatre unless you're good. You know, there's a lot of television and film actors who can't do theatre, and it's not really true the other way around. It is the great testing ground, but you can't really make a good living at it. So people do more and more television, which requires less and less of that muscle. For two reasons. One is the rise of, mass media, and for me, the more profound one is the decline of oracy in our education system. I think that is true.
Yep.
Can I ask you a question about the different hats you had to wear and the rules of thumb you developed for wearing them? And so that is, when you're picking a play, what are your rules of thumb for saying that's the one we've got to do? When you're dealing with the government, what are your rules of thumb for navigating that? And then finally, when you're making decisions for the national one, what was your kind of rules of thumb or instinct for how to make those decisions? So 3 hats, 3 rules of thumb for how you navigated those hats.
Well, in a way, the rule of thumb for all of them is the same, which is know why you're doing something. And then how you do it gets easier because you know why you're doing it. So if when you're choosing a play, you're going, well, we've got, the bottom line is we have to hit the bottom line, so people have got to come. So are people going to come and see this? Are we working with people who I want to have in the building because of the way that they work? A lot of
I lead from the middle, not so much from the front. So almost every decision I made was collaborative anyway. I made almost no decisions in isolation. But it also means that I want to be working with people who want to be there and look after each other. So, you know, are an audience going to come and see this? Are these people who are going to make the production going to work in a way that is commensurate with the kind of value system that I think is important? In terms of representation, that you've got to see everything in balance with everything else. No choice is made in isolation. When we're doing that play, we'll have 4 others in rehearsal. We might have 3 others in performance. There might be 2 in the West End. There might be, does it fit into the panoply? Am I just drawn towards it because it's my taste? My taste is very limited. I've got to reflect the taste of our audience, and that is why it's so important to have other people feeding into that. So that's one. In terms of government, same thing. Why are we doing something? If I know why we're, I'm trying to think of, one of the hardest moments for me was coming back to the theatre one day after doing an event, and it was the one time that I was almost not allowed into the theatre that I was running. And there was only one part of the theatre, it's because we were doing a production. And the production, I'm not going to name the production, it was a production I was very proud of, and it was a very difficult production to mount, but it was very contentious, and it was inevitably filled with people who are not fans of our government. But that day, I was doing an event in Downing Street where we'd taken over number 10, and we had put different things going on in all sorts of rooms in different ways. And Rishi Sunak had come to have a look round, along with all his ministers and everything else. And of course, there were images of me and Rishi having a good laugh in his office as a scene from Small Island, which I decided to do there, Small Island, Andrea Levy, Jamaica, UK. I deliberately had a politically conscious scene that I was rehearsing there because I knew Rishi and I would be photographed, etc. But because there were these photos of me in the heart of government, there were people in my own theatre who didn't want me to come into the building because I was a traitor to, no matter, I just killed myself to get their show on for the last 3 years and fundraised for it and everything else. I knew why I was doing that thing. I need Rishi Sunak to be on side. They're our major funder. Also, we're a national theatre. We're not a national theatre only for people who vote for the Monster Raving Looming Party, whatever it is. But I also know what my core values are. So you can, I feel like I'm sort of preaching or table thumping here. But it all comes down to, how did you put it? Code, you didn't say code, you said...
different rules of thumb.
Yeah, rules of thumb. It really always comes down to the same thing. Know why you're doing something and really, really listen to the people around you.
The gentleman there has been waiting for a bit.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how do you balance, when you're choosing a play to put on, how do you balance between, like, say, novelty of form, depth of message or novelty of message, and relevance or immediate topical relevance of the content, and maybe other considerations too?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. I think that third one is really key, that you've put your finger on there, and I would call it resonance. Because relevance makes it sound like it's got to be relevant to, the Ukraine war or the fact that, the Ashes is a contentious thing for those who follow cricket in this second in time, whereas resonance means it just resonates. And you can find in Marlowe, in Shakespeare, in Chekhov, and in something that was written last week, a resonance or lack of it, depending on the material and depending on how the material is done. So I think that's really, that applies to everything. Is this going to resonate? But then the question is, resonate with who? Resonate with a part of our audience that we are looking to be serving and perhaps aren't being served elsewhere in our programme. So you can put on the importance of being earnest in a really daft camp way. But actually, if you do daft and camp in a really thoughtful way, then that will resonate with the LGBTQ plus community, because of course what Oscar Wilde is writing about is what cannot be spoken out loud. So you can celebrate it whilst honouring that play. Do the play, do what Wilde wrote. You don't change the lines, but you do it in a way which will resonate. You can do Three Sisters. It doesn't really speak to us now, but you get Inua Eliams to adapt it and set it in the Biafran War, then we understand how Chekhov's writing is universal. And you're also speaking to the broad West African diaspora that's in the UK who don't see themselves represented on stage, etc., etc. Formally, that's trickier. For me, there's not many people who really do push the form. A lot of stuff that it pushes the form extremely doesn't yet have an audience. So that London Road that Robin mentioned is a great example of, breaking ground formally. But we did it in a little theatre first. We didn't do it in the Olivier first time around. That would have been financially extremely imprudent. So, so in my time, our smallest theatre was given over to new writing exclusively, and encouraged people to be formally adventurous there. If you're in the bigger theatres, we encourage a lot of formal stuff. If you look at various productions, Alexander Zeldin, Simon Stone, Annie Baker. There's quite a few people who are pushing form around, but you've got to give them a chance for it to succeed. Putting an artist out there because I think they're great when quietly I know that they're going to get hammered is not serving them. I hope that. Yeah.
Your consideration is primary, you've got to get bums on seats, right? So how do you do that and be a good artist as well?
Yeah. And you've got to realise also that it's the National Theatre. National Theatre is a place that many brilliant artists like to throw stones at rather than make work within, and that's just the way of it. A lot of artists don't want to be in the Tate, and that doesn't mean the Tate isn't valuable. It's hard to be cool in a place that is in itself defined by being not that.
Rufus, drawing a line there. Many, many thanks. Hugely appreciate you joining us again 10 years on, and hopefully we might make it rather sooner next time, no more than 5 years, and we very much look forward to seeing you again on your new path. So if I
Thank you.
I think the youngsters will go and get fed.
Yeah, go and get some food.